Hey everybody, it's Gavin with Abley Digital Engineering, and we're back with Hamish's second Fireside from Bonn, Germany, where he's at the peak of data integration with FME and the FME user conference. So welcome, Hamish. This is
Thank
super
you.
awesome. Thanks for taking the time. I know it's late in the evening there, and it's early in the morning here. So this cross-hemispheric chat can happen, and we get to hear more about what you've seen over the last couple of days. So yeah, blow us away. I'm pretty excited about this.
Yeah. It's been a jam-packed past couple of days, past 48 hours. So we really kicked into, obviously, when we last caught up, Gav, we'd sort of just had the plenary and sort of those kickoff
Yep.
sessions. But over the last sort of 2 days, we've really started diving into some of the user stories around how people in the wider community are using FME. And there was a real common theme that I saw sort of happening, and it was an alignment on how everyone's using FME and how everyone's being really sort of innovative and how they're using FME and pushing forward. And what's awesome to see is that Abley, we are doing stuff that aligns with what all these other big organizations, the Tenzings, the Wecos, the Conteras, what they're all doing. And even though we're working separately on all our different projects, we're all heading in the same direction and sort of working towards improving the way that all our customers sort of perform and utilize their data. There were a couple, I've probably been to maybe a dozen user presentations over the last 2 days. And the range of stuff that people are doing is really, really cool. And in no particular order. And I know I'm definitely missing out on some really, really interesting, topics. But there's a couple that sort of were quite interesting to me. And one of them was from Brett Madsen, who is based over in Australia, so pretty close to home for us. So I know I've met him a few times before, and I do like to have him on that. He's been using FME for longer than I've been alive. So he was one of the first people to use FME when
OG.
safe. Pretty much. But he sort of spoke about some of the stuff that he was doing in Geoscience Australia over the COVID lockdown, and it was really cool how they were deploying stuff into the cloud and utilizing all that cloud infrastructure so that people can work remotely on their centralized systems and basically placing the working parts of FME right beside the data, which was a big theme as well.
Yeah,
and
I was curious about that. I think, is that a common theme that you're seeing nowadays in as well? A lot of presentations on going to cloud and those types of things.
Definitely, and that's sort of it was a little bit funny because before I started sort of working, and probably quite a few years before that even, people would work on thin clients and connect them to a central server, central machine to do their work. Then it all moved to people working off their laptops. And now we're seeing a migration back to people connecting to remote machines so that they're processing right beside the data. So it's really fast, really efficient. And one cool thing that Brett was doing with his work was when they were just doing normal day-to-day processing, they were running a pretty lightweight virtual machine. But because they were running virtually in the cloud, when they had to process large amounts of data, they just simply scaled up their instance for the period of time that they needed it and were able to get those performance gains really efficiently, really fast, and in the grand scheme of things, really, really cheaply. So that was a really cool presentation from Brett there. Just sort of looking through my notes here. And another really cool one was from, and I'm possibly not going to pronounce the name correctly here, but Mikhail Schramm from Sweco. And he talked about how to sort of optimize the performance of your workflows. And it's something that we internally at Abley talk about a lot. And it's just it's the simple things, but it's the simple things that are often looked over. So things like filtering out data that you don't need. So instead of reading an entire data set, hey, put a filter on it. Just read in the data that you need to process. So things like where clauses. And also something he explored in his presentation was actually begin to play around with group buys and not just do a group buy and say, oh, that's the most efficient way, but actually try different group buys and see how it performs and try and optimize that group buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so that
and
was
sometimes checking the times, like going through the log and saying, is this group buy working faster? Is it better to do it this way or with this transformer? I mean, you can do multiple things with different transformers. So maybe which one is doing the task that you want quicker, just based on your log times.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really nice because it was skipping over some really simple functionality with FME, but some actually really important stuff. So it was cool to see that highlighted at such a level, at like a world international conference level. And then there were, so FME, as we all sort of know, it doesn't necessarily replace a programming language, but it can achieve a lot of what a programming language can. And programming languages code that often goes through like a CI/CD, so a continuous integration, continuous development sort of workflow, and you've got branching and versions and collaboration across all of that. And whilst FME is still in sort of infancy around that, and it has been alluded to that those things are going to improve in time, there were numerous presentations about how various companies were utilizing some of those CI/CD workflows and versioning to automate a whole bunch of stuff. So I'll probably miss some here, but Martin Koch from Tensing was one great example. Stuart Harper from Safe, he also spoke about it. Sorry, I'm just flicking through my notes. Martin Van Dornit from Tensing spoke about it. There were a whole bunch of different people talking about how they're implementing this sort of more what you'd see as a programming workflow into managing their FME projects. And it really shows just how far and just how trusted, how more sort of robust FME is being seen in the wider industry.
Yeah, so we've actually rolled that out here in the office on one project that I know of, and probably more, but it's great for redundancy, just resilience and versioning. Those are the biggies. So you can go back in time and see what exactly happened and what changes happened. But not only that, you can have multiple people working on it at the same time, and all those other things that come with product versioning or your versioning that goes out with every release. When you actually release a package, and you can use Git with some of these things, and keep FME in the same process that the larger business is using as well.
Definitely, and it's keeping them all sort of condensed together. And there was some real cool, some cool sort of things that were proposed in the up and coming much later versions of FME, such as incorporating Git into Workbench, so into FME form as the actual application, as well as some improvements around how projects are managed. And then, so this wasn't sort of shown at the end of the conference. Safe always does sort of what's coming up, and this wasn't part of it, but it was part of someone else's presentation. That historically repositories were sort of seen as your one place for a project, but as connections, web connections, database connections, groups, all of that sort of stuff have come into it, that projects have sort of taken over that. And at the moment, there's sort of this, is projects or is repositories sort of the master sort of source? So there was some really interesting discussion around how Safe is looking at sort of promoting projects to be the primary source, and then having a whole bunch of abilities to look at something in a project and see, hey, where else does this sit? And then look at something and say, hey, what projects does this sit in? And then to really help manage the data and the information and the connections within your FME server.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because you're right. It kind of hasn't I don't know, I never really thought about it before, but that repository is where you put all your data, and then everything else kind of goes in different separate areas and whatnot. So a project does kind of keep those things bundled for you. And yeah, that's
Definitely.
pretty slick. Cool.
Yeah. And then so the journey ahead sort of section of the conferences.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all cool, but this was where that sort of that's exciting, where that
And
real
get to see behind the curtain a little bit.
Pulling back the curtain. So that was the last session of today, and before that, it was a session. Dale did a session on bulk mode, and basically, we're not going to hear about bulk mode anymore because bulk mode has been implemented across. Bulk mode is now the default. Right. So for those of you who don't know what bulk mode is, I'll give a really simplified explanation. But historically, FME would read one row at a time, and that's fine. And the reason why we read one row at a time was that when the very first instance of FME was built, it was just assumed that every row was going to be a different schema. And that existed for years because that was just how it was built. Until, I don't think I wrote down the date, but until someone, they introduced a point cloud reader. And someone started playing, I think it was someone in Sweden, started playing around with a point cloud reader, reading in non-point cloud data. And discovered that, wow, this is so much faster. And the reason was because the point cloud reader was assuming that everything was in the same schema. And that sort of kick-started that idea of this bulk mode sort of process. So now, over the last sort of, they kicked this off, I think Dale said about 2016 was when all of this sort of started kicking off. They've basically gone through, and there's over 300 transformers now that support bulk mode. And of those, basically they are the 300 transformers that will be the ones to support bulk mode. Because the other ones can't for whatever reason or don't have a requirement to. So bulk mode implementation is basically done. So you should never really hear about it anymore. In the future, any new transformers will by default use bulk mode.
Nice.
And
a little bit of in the meantime, a little bit of a callback. The point cloud reader one, we actually discussed that on a Fireside. Oh, I don't even know, maybe a year or 18 months ago. So if anybody's interested in a deeper dive on that point cloud reader and how it can optimize some of your workflows, and just point clouds in general, the chat is around point clouds. Hop onto your video platform of choice, probably YouTube is the best one, and do a search for FME Firesides and point clouds. You'll be able to find that info, and take 20 minutes worth of your day to listen to two Kiwis and an American talk about point clouds for a little while.
So that leads quite nicely into sort of just summing up some of that really cool new stuff that's up and coming. So there was probably about 10 or so new formats and big updates to existing formats. And probably one that really stood out to me was improved support and ability for FME to read and write attachments in ArcGIS Online. So that's pretty cool, because I know that historically, when I've had to deal with attachments, it's always had to be through the REST API. So now having the reader supporting that's pretty cool. And there's been updates to like the IFC readers, Revit, multiple updates to Revit, City GML, then an introduction of a whole bunch of other formats.
I think I saw something about like Revit databases. Is that right?
Yes. So treating. So I didn't quite understand when it was explained, but I'm sure there'll be some more documentation about it in time. But sort of treating Revit as a database, so being able to open it up and actually interrogate the data in a lot better. And then, I mean, we're no one's a big fan of change, but there is going to be some changes coming through to Workbench, unfortunately. Fortunately,
I was going to say, you just got to move forward. It's always the way things go, right? They have to be able to integrate with the web, because that's where things are going anyway. So there's got to be things that they're putting in play for their future and for everybody's future. Really, we're all in this together.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're doing a big alignment, sort of the stylization across the workspace viewer and server,
Nice.
and the style and symbol and sort of layout and colorings of transformers and readers and whatnot in desktop.
Yeah, some user experience things.
Yeah, I believe that's coming in as a sort of as a beta in 24. They're not 2024 anymore, so 24.0. I believe it's coming in. And then there's also some talk about with these changes, you can now actually combine and stack transformers. So what seems really cool with that is historically, when you've had, say, you've written a GDB and there's been 5 feature classes, and you want to read in every 5 feature classes, you've got 5 separate readers for each feature class.
Right.
Well, now you can actually combine them all together, and you can treat them as one. So you can sort of change all the settings as one. So that looks like a really cool.
Nice. Because like in there you just run a where clause and you have to do it individually against the different feature classes in some cases, and you might tweak some things in there. All right, cool.
Yeah, so I believe they're sort of combining a lot of that together, and making some big improvements to comments as well. So having them hidden by default and only showing when you hover over them. I'm sure there will be a way to turn them on permanently. But making it a bit more a bit less cluttered. And because I know in the current versions, if you turn your comments off, you can't actually view them without going and turning them back on. Whereas this way, they'll be hidden by default, but you can view them by hovering over them. And then also allowing sort of a more conversational way. So if you think when you're working in a shared Word document, you can, have a timestamp conversation about a particular comment. So introducing that in as well, so you can.
Interesting.
If you're multiple people working on one process, you can see sort of a progression and a conversation around that. And then another really, really awesome thing they showed is comments inside transformers. So say you've got a tester and you're checking for something that's longer than 400 meters. Why 400 meters? Well, you could have a comment on the canvas, but it makes more sense to have your comment actually in that test logic. So being able to put comments, basically, I think Dale and Don said, anywhere you can do a text entry, you can write a comment.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's cool.
And lots of different places.
And in readers and writers and on connectors, potentially, like, why are you connecting this to that and this to that and whatnot? So, and
then, I mean, a lot of these things are ideas that they've got in the works. They don't really have a date. So if they don't come out in the next version, don't hold it against me. But there's other ones, but we don't have time. I could talk for an hour.
And like when they're planning their feature roadmap, they probably have other things that they have to consider with regard to if they roll out that comment thing. How's it going to roll out to the web workspace viewer, and then potentially the workspace editor in a web environment once that gets rolled out as well? How is all of that going to interact and play, and how does it look? So there's a lot of things that they have to consider now. It's not just in your workbench or workbench that you would see it.
And then a couple of other really cool, obviously, performance improvements. They're always looking to improve the performance of their software. So I think we spoke about it briefly in the last catch up, but performance improvements across the board. Also, something that's really exciting for me is multiple input and output ports on a Python caller. So I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work in terms of capturing the data within Python.
And mapping that data within there and all those things.
But having that ability is really cool, because from what I can see is you can basically have a rejected port coming out of your Python caller. So you can instantly, without having to put a tester or something in place, you can instantly now begin to capture potential errors within your Python code. So that's going to be cool. That's going to be a cool one to keep an eye out. They're rolling out more of the AI assist to other transformers. So if you struggle with writing, like I do, writing XQuery for XML, I don't even know where to start with that. There's now AI Assist for that, as well as for RCooler. And they were also playing around with some AI assistants for documenting your workbench, which for someone like me who does not like documentation is an absolute lifesaver. So that sounds really cool. And then they were playing around with a few other things with AI, but it's a very long game.
Yeah, that's cool. That is cool, especially with the AI of the documentation process. I mean, I could see it being almost, it just populates the what's the annotation, the complete annotation on different transformers. It just populates those across the board and then kind of reads through them potentially and figures out what's going on. Yeah, that'd be neat.
And then the very last thing that they finished up with, which I think is very, very cool, and I know it's something that our colleague Todd Davis has wanted for a while and has basically been asking, when is it coming? And they still don't have an answer of when it's coming, but Workbench in the browser. So being able to edit your workbenches within the Flow interface. There's a few hurdles that they need to overcome, and it was something that, when they explained it, made perfect sense. If you're working in a browser, you don't have access to an FME engine to actually run your workbench, to add readers and writers, to look at like the schema of data you're dealing with. So what they're looking at, what they're exploring at the moment, actually ties in with something new that they've brought out recently, is remote engines. So having the ability for the browser to then interact with a remote engine, whether that's on the Flow instance you're working or even a remote engine on your actual physical machine, to do that processing. So that's probably still a few years in the making. But that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, no, and that is a conversation. I think it's probably existed in almost most FME circles that deal with FME quite a bit, and FME Flow in particular. And so hearing that it's on the horizon is pretty cool. And like you said, I mean, I'm sure that they like to tease that stuff, and it'll be in beta for at least a year, but that is really cool to see that it's being developed now.
Yes, yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I mean, I see you're starting to get blinded by the rising sun over that side of the world. And yeah, we had the conference dinner last night, so
nice.
It wasn't a late night, but it was a tiring night for me last night. So I think it's time we probably called it. I want to go to bed.
I understand. Do you have are there any sessions tomorrow or anything, or is the conference concluded?
So today was the last day of the conference. It was a great time. Got to catch up with a whole bunch of people that I've met over the forums, on the community forum. So it was nice to finally put a face to the name and see who I'm competing against for points. And then also to catch up with people that I haven't seen for a very long time, probably since I was at the last conference back in 2017, 2018. So it was awesome to see those faces again and reconnect. It was a really, really good time.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I agree. You quite an opportunity. I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on this call and fill us all in. We all were a bit excited for you to be over there, and we wish we could be in your shoes, but we're happy that you're there and happy that you're filling us in on everything. Exciting things coming from SAFE and with FME, and I mean, the rebrand was just the tip of the iceberg with what's coming, and that's always been the case. So we at Abley are super excited to start implementing these types of things and talking to different organizations and companies that we work with about how these different new features and new implementations are coming onto the platform and how we could use those within those organizations. So if any of you are online and excited about some of these things and want to chat with Hamish or myself or Todd or Chris or any of the team, please reach out to us. We love talking FME, as you can tell. and we'd be happy to have a chat with you as well. So thanks again, Hamish. Look forward to you showing back up at the office here in a week or so. And
not long now.
Yeah, when that time comes, we get to start playing around with some of these cool features that you saw over in Bonn.
Yep. No, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. This is another Abley DE Fireside or FME Fireside. So we'll catch you on the next one when we talk and dive deeper into FME. Thanks.
All right. Catch you guys.